So we're talking about when life isn't fair. Uh, I got one. I saved up a ton of money. I've been getting into surfing lately, and I'm like, it's fun, it's cool, and I've been like, okay, I think it's time for me to take the leap and to buy my own surfboard. So I bought a brand new surfboard for the first time. Dude, it was so expensive. I had to buy like a board, new fins because the fin type was different, a track pad, all of that. Ended up being like $1,000. Like, yeah, altogether. Brand new, brand new. I've been like wanting this board for a super long. No, yeah. No, yeah, I know. I know. And so I take it out, I'm paddling out, and like I catch a wave, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, this is the greatest thing ever. Like, this was so worth it. And then the third time that I'm riding it, the third day, I like stop paying attention for a second. I step on the tail and I feel it hit a rock under the water, and it just crunches like right on the edge. It like completely like shattered basically. And so I got to surf it 3 times. It's been in the shop trying to get repaired for like 2 weeks now. And I'm just like, well, that sucks. Life is unfair. I mean, even having to like do this online right now can feel unfair. I mean, with school being crazy, with Alive being online, and we can't figure out the mics, that might feel unfair. Life is often unfair. Would you all agree? You know, if here's like a big one for me is when I was in high school around, what was it, sophomore junior ish year of high school. I was just hanging out with my brothers one night, and then my dad comes into the room and he's like, hey, just thought you guys should know that uh your mom and I are splitting up. And I was like, uh huh. um and it sucked. It was like a very long, terrible process. Um, like super rough. I didn't do anything to deserve it. There's nothing I could do to stop it. Like, it was just unfair in that moment, and it was just a terrible time. But then sometimes life is unfair, and I want to tell you all that sometimes bad things just happen. uh Sometimes there are like things to say about consequences of your actions, and you make a bad decision, like me not paying attention when I'm surfing and I break my board, not break, but like I ding my board. But sometimes things happen that are out of our control, that are unfair. And so we're going to talk about what it means, what we should do in response to that. Here's a story that I want Ashley to tell. I have very bad taste in movies. Um, I like really weird, like art house, doesn't make any sense kind of movies. Um, and so, can you just tell them about Twin Peaks?
All right, you guys. Willie is one of those people who will hype up something, and maybe you have friends like this who will literally hype up something that is so good. Like, we'll just say, oh my gosh, you have to watch this one show, or you have to go get a pumpkin spice latte. Okay. And Willie did that for this show called Twin Peaks. It was made in the 90s. Okay. So whenever we like tell people that we're watching it, they're always surprised. Um, the first time I watched it, it was awful. There's 3 seasons, and Willie made me watch it from episode 1 to the very end. And it was bad. I was like, this isn't even good. It was like weird and kind of like really like suspenseful at some points that just made you uncomfortable. And I was like, I can't believe that I'm spending my time watching this right now. And so sometimes like we have people that will recommend something to us or say, oh my gosh, you have to try this one thing. And it's just not good, and we put our like trust in that person, right? Like, of course, if Willie says, oh, we have to watch this movie, I'm going to think, oh yeah, he cares about me. So he probably wants me to watch something good. This was not the case. Yeah. But sometimes that happens, right? Like, I could tell you to go get a pumpkin spice latte and you might get it and be like, this is trash, Ashley. It tastes like soap. Um, but if you are like, me, and I think there was somebody else on here, Alicia, then we could be friends because we both like it.
Yeah, sometimes things happen that are out of our control. Like your husband wants you to watch this very, very good TV show, by the way. Actually, they did make a movie. But
Willie liked this show so much that he literally the other day was like, I think I'm gonna get a tattoo from Twin Peaks. Oh, and I was like, and he told me what he wanted to get, and I was like, no, absolutely not. Like, Willie is like ride or die for this TV show. And sometimes there's people like that. But Willie literally wanted to get a tattoo of Twin Peaks on his body. So
we've been watching the show Ink Masters. Have you guys ever watched this show, Ink Masters? Basically, it's like a reality competition where they compete with tattoos. And they have like time limits and all of that. And it's like real tattoos on real people. It is so funny because they come in and they're all like excited. And like the people that are getting tattooed are like, that's so sick. Like put it over here on my leg and like this huge tattoo. And then they like show a close up of the tattoo's hand. And it's like two right hands and the fingers are all jangled. And it's like, oh my gosh, this person had such high expectations, completely out of their control. They're not the tattoo artist. And like, it was just completely unfair. But even when weird things happen and friends recommend bad TV shows, I still haven't checked out. This is the one that like gets the most hype that I actually believe is High School Musical, the musical, the series. Rachel just said ew. No. Ashley's shaking her head. Have you guys watched it?
No. I did.
You did? Auntie Jojo did? That one looks really good. Okay, but is High School Musical, the musical, the series worth the hype?
I liked it. I didn't watch
Auntie Jojo liked it.
That's where we're at. The senior year, you guys.
The kids on High School Musical, the musical, the series are very talented. Anyway, sometimes in life, bad things happen. Life is very often unfair. The Bible is full of stories of unfair situations, like Moses, trying to do the right thing, and Pharaoh is like, no, or Job. The whole book of Job is like one whole unfair situation. Even this is where like, people think, oh, if I become a Christian, then like life is gonna be good. Man, Jesus's life was kind of rough. Like the literal guy who did no wrong. Unfair things happened to him. But this is important to know that when unfair situations happen in our lives, God is still in control. God is in control. Now, look, one of my favorite verses is Romans 8:28. And that says, and we know that in all things, God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. Because anytime there's like an unfair situation in my life or something that's going wrong, I just remember, look, God is in control. I don't understand why this is happening. I wish that it wasn't, but I know that God has a plan and a purpose for my life. And so I'm just going to like keep trying to follow him. Yeah.
Sorry, that was awkward. I'm going to speak on this for a second, then Rachel's going to share a story. But that verse that Willie shared, if you have been at church like at all for any amount of time, you've probably heard someone tell that to you or say like, oh, well, God works out all things. Like it's going to be okay. And for me, I've been a Christian for a while. And one thing that I really like to do is figure out what a verse is actually trying to say, right? Because the Bible was not written in English. It had to be translated. And so sometimes things get translated and the meaning isn't what it actually means. And And so I remember like a few years ago, I was trying to figure out what this verse actually meant because it's like something that Christians say all the time. And when it says God works for the good, the word works actually means that he co-labors with you, which means that when we go through hard things, yes, our response should be to trust God and know that he's in control. But it's also saying that God isn't just going to necessarily carry us through. Like there's things that we have to do to work alongside God in order to get us from one side to the other. It's kind of like relying on God. If you're in a pitch black room, God's always trying to give us like that silver lining or that glimmer of hope, because that's who God is, right? Is he gives us hope in those situations. But unless we trust him in the dark, we won't actually get to the light part. Like God actually wants to get us there. And sometimes it's hard and we might stumble over things. Like this isn't to say that we have to like strive to get out of those situations, but it means that also we're not supposed to just sit back on the couch and let God do whatever he needs to do. So when you hear that verse, like just think about it, that it's not just, oh, well, I didn't study for my test. So, but God works all things out for the good, and then you fail, right? Like if you want to see growth, then if we know that God works things out for the good, that means you're also going to trust that God's good and put in the work to study so that test comes out positive, right? So it's not just blindly living life and hoping that it's going to be good at the end.
Wow, thank you. Thank you, Ashley. So for me, a story that I think I can relate to Romans 8:28. I have had to quarantine multiple times during COVID due to work situations. And by I think was the second or third time, I was like, oh my God, seriously. Like, why do I have to? This isn't like, yeah, this isn't fair. And me and my coworker were just like venting, and I was like, okay, wait, you know what? Like, I'm not even gonna be upset. I'll I'm gonna take this time to be productive. Um, and like this is out of my control. So I'm gonna have peace about the situation, and I'm just gonna do what God already told me to do. So being stuck in my room for the third time, I use that time because I've been trying to like purge and clean out stuff, and um I've been single for 3 years, and till this day it still is a healing process. And so I was getting rid of stuff that were like gifts from my ex, and I thought it like for a time it was okay to like hang on to. I was like, oh yeah, like I like it. So I'm just gonna keep it. And then this year I felt like God was prompting me. It's like, okay, like it's time to let it go, kiddo. Like you need to let it go. And I was like, really? And he said, yes. I was like, oh, okay. So I had this pop figure that was a gift from him for my graduation. And I was like, oh, this is really nice. Like, let me just savor it one last time. So I opened it. This is my first time opening it. And I find handwritten letter from my ex. This pop figure was sitting on top of my bookshelf for 3 years. And only now I had discovered it. And I was like, oh my gosh. Like as soon as I saw a glimpse of his handwriting, I started shaking. I was like, oh my God, like I was freaking out. And then I was like, okay, Lord, like you help me. You help me to process this letter. And so I read it, and like I was like I just sat there and I was like, absorbing it, and to receive it now, thinking if I had read this letter in the beginning of our breakup, I probably would have stayed with him. If I had read it like last year when I was super angry and bitter, I would have like totally disregarded anything that he said in that letter. But to read it at that point in time, I was able to receive it and like, wow, like yeah, just receive it with peace. And like I did make an impact on his life. And like even though we did have ups and downs, like it was like a big part. We shared a big part of our life. I was with him for almost 8 years. basically a lot of our growing up together. And then mind you, this happened all around right before July 4th. And that was like when I was due to like July 4th, Independence Day was when they're like, okay, like you can go back to work. So if you just think about the symbolism there, that's Independence Day. And it was just like, wow, like God was giving me another piece of freedom from that relationship. So yeah, even though like that situation sucked, like God gave me a gift in that time. So yeah.
Yeah, that is a great segue because the last point is about how when life is rough, God is good. Life's rough, God's good. So one of the weird things about following Jesus is like the backwards, upside down like phrases and lifestyle that he led in examples in the Bible of like you have to lose your soul to save it, or give everything to gain everything. And this is one of them, is that when life is at its worst, when we feel like we're at the end of our rope, when we're stuck in our room, or we're on Zoom and we can't do what we want to do, that's when God really shows us the depth of how much he loves us. And what's crazy is that like all of the leaders here have stories of when we were at like super low points in our lives, when we were like, this is the worst that life could ever be. And through that moment, we like came to realize how good God is and how much he loves us. And so one of the like upside downness of following Jesus is that when life is super rough, when life is absolute garbo, that is when we recognize how good God is. Like that the contrast is even greater. Here's a verse that I thought was very, very applicable, and that's 2 Corinthians 4, verses 7 through 9. Now, the guy who's writing this, his name is Paul. My last name is Paul, no relation. Thanks. I think that's funny every time I say it. I think it's the first time I've ever gotten a laugh from it. But this dude was like, had his whole life turned around, was going and like preaching, starting churches and everything, but he was like shipwrecked. He was got 40 lashes minus one, which is back in the day. They had like whips, and they thought 40 would kill you, and so they would give you 39. He had that like multiple times. He got bit by a snake while he was on an island, shipwrecked. All of this bad stuff was happening to him. And so through the lens of all of these unfair situations, he comes out and he writes, we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that this all surpassing power is from God and not from us. We are hard pressed on every side, but not crushed, perplexed, but not in despair, persecuted, but not abandoned, struck down, but not destroyed. Uncle Chris, you're saying there's like this old, yeah. Hey, Sunday mornings when we were meeting upstairs with the middle schoolers, that's the song that Uncle Chris would always sing. But what this verse is always like, imagine just treasure in a jar of clay, like something so valuable, something so precious, put into something so fragile. And that is what following Jesus is really like. That when we go through hard situations, that when we go through unfair times, when life is at its lowest, that we don't think, well, okay, I just got to toughen up and take it. Or if I just work, if I study for an extra hour, or if I work a little harder, or if I do this or do that, that all of my problems, I can work my way out of my problems. But really what following Jesus is about is recognizing like, hey man, like I don't have what it takes. Like this is an unfair situation. Like when my parents were splitting up, I was like, I can't do anything. Like what I would try to do chores and make sure all the dishes were washed before my parents got home, but what's that gonna do? And so it was in those moments where I was like, God, I feel helpless. Like I was in bed, like just God, why is this happening? Like I feel so helpless. And God was speaking and just basically saying like, basically like, hey, you have this family, and like right now you can't see it, but like now that I can look back years later, like the faith that I developed in that like terrible moment, as I trusted in God, and as Ashley was talking about, as I co-labored with God, as I didn't just sit back and wait for God to like snap his fingers, Thanos snap, and half of my problems dissolve. As I like worked to follow God and to make all these situations work, like I can look back all these years later, almost 10 years later, and see like where God was. And I can like look back and say, man, God, you were with me through the darkest time. All of us have stories like that where we've been at our absolute lowest, and like God pulled through in those moments. And so there's this phrase, have you ever heard this phrase? Like God won't give you more than you can handle. Man, yeah, I don't think that's true. Like there are so many times where God gives us things more than we can handle, and like more just frustrating, more depressing, more like unbelievable than we on our own can handle. But there's this other phrase that I really like, and that's when we get to the end of ourselves, we come to the beginning of God. And so when we are at our lowest, that is when God is at his greatest. Like when we are just, I don't have anything left, that's when we learn to let go, to say, you know what, God, I'm going to trust you. I know that you have a plan, that even when life is rough, that you're still good, God. And I'm going to keep working and keep co-laboring with you, following after where you're guiding, so that I can go into your plan. Look, life's rough right now. Life is unfair right now for all of us, whether it's school or work or like family life, whatever it is for you. Life is pretty unfair. But through all of that, I know that God is good. And like I can say that with confidence. And so as we wrap up tonight, I want to challenge you to put God to the test on this one, to say, you know what, God, if life is unfair for you right now, spend some time praying and just say, you know what, God, life is unfair. Like I do not enjoy anything about this, but show me that you're here with me and that you're good. Spend some time in prayer this week, tonight after we're done, on your own, with your family, with some friends, and just ask God to show his goodness. Because when we realize that we are just jars of clay, but inside of us, God has put this treasure, this all surpassing peace and power through Jesus, that if we follow after him, that we can have this strength that is not of our own.